The sky over the steppes of Ursh churned with ash and smoke, the remnants of 1,000 burning pyres. The air reeked of scorched flesh, ozone, and the metallic tang of unending war. Here, in this desolate expanse of Central Asia, where the bones of countless civilizations lay shattered beneath a pall of radioactive dust, the age of strife clung tenaciously to its dying embers. The land was unforgiving, the people even more so. They called it the Kalagann Wastes now, though it had once been a cradle of humanity. Now it was a furnace of conquest, where despots ruled with iron fists, and ambition often drowned in blood before it could blossom into legacy. Ursh, the great and terrible empire that spanned these cursed lands, was the largest of the Techno-Barbarian states. Its borders stretched across the Siberian tundra, down through the shattered remnants of old Russia and into the blackened skeletons of long-dead cities. At its heart stood Kalagann, Lord of Ursh, a man who had risen above the anarchic ruin of old night to forge a kingdom out of madness and chaos. To his followers, he was a living god, adorned in the armor of pearl, his visage terrible to behold. To his enemies, he was a tyrant, a sorcerer, and a monster, an unholy vessel for the powers that whispered in the warp. Ursh's armies were a nightmare given form. Billions of soldiers, armed with the detritus of a forgotten age, marched beneath a forest of black banners and gilded standards. Psychers, their minds burned raw by their connection to the immaterium, unleashed cyclopean storms of unearthly power that left entire armies writhing in blood and horror. And then there were the machines. Half-forgotten horrors dredged from the ruins of the dark age of technology, ancient automata whose unfeeling claws and plasma-ridden maws obliterated all that stood before them. The ground trembled when the legions of Ursh marched, a sound like the heartbeat of the world itself. But for all its might, Ursh was not unassailable. The Emperor had come. He had been a shadow, a whispered name, a figure glimpsed in the chaos of the Unification Wars. But now, he was a reality, his armies tearing through the Techno-Barbarian states like wildfire through dry brush. And Ursh, for all its psychic might and brutal strength, would not be spared. Kalagann had heard of the Emperor's advance long before he reached Ursh's borders. Reports filtered in like the cries of distant thunder. The Nord-Afric conclaves shattered, High Brazil subjugated, the Pan-Pacific Empire gutted. The so-called Thunder Warriors, the Emperor's gene-forged giants, were said to be unstoppable, their bronze armor impervious to even the deadliest of weapons. Yet Kalagann did not fear. His generals, Tumultuous, Shankal, and Kalagann, assured him that the might of Ursh could not be broken. They spoke of unholy pacts and rituals yet to be performed, of storms that would flay the Emperor's armies to the bone. Kalagann himself, it was said, had consulted with the dark powers, his throne room lit by the baleful glow of unearthly fire. Even so, the shadow of the Emperor loomed ever larger. Scouts reported that his forces were massing at the southernmost edge of Ursh's territories, near the ruins of what had once been the Aral Sea. Kalagann ordered his armies to prepare. The skies darkened, and the wind carried the sound of drums, a deep, primal beat that echoed across the steppes. War was coming. The southernmost border of Ursh was a desolate expanse of cracked earth and jagged rock where the bones of ancient civilizations had long since turned to dust. It was here, among the ruins of the Aral Sea, that the Emperor's armies prepared to strike. The Thunder Warriors stood like monolithic statues, their immense forms glinting faintly beneath a shrouded sky. Their bronze armor bore the scars of countless battles, each gouge and dent a testament to their violent purpose. They were not men, at least not anymore. They were something else, something crafted for war. Their purpose was singular, to destroy, to kill, and to conquer. Yet their creation had not been without flaws. These beings, unmatched in their ferocity and power, occasionally turned on their own in uncontrollable fits of rage, a grim reminder that even the Emperor's mightiest tools were imperfect. Some among the Thunder Warriors displayed traits that, by modern understanding, would be called psychopathy. These were the warriors who seemed to revel in slaughter, their brutality more than a matter of duty. It was a grim pleasure. They found joy in the rending of flesh, in the breaking of bone, their laughter a chilling counterpoint to the screams of their victims. To most, these soldiers were monsters, barely distinguishable from the enemies they faced. The Emperor tolerated these flaws for now, knowing they were a byproduct of the desperate need for quick victories. But he also understood that such instability would one day doom his vision. These were lessons he would carry into the creation of his future legions of warriors, whose gene seed would be crafted not only to perfect the strength of the Thunder Warriors, but to excise, for the most part, these darker tendencies. The Emperor himself surveyed the battlefield from a rise of blackened stone, his form wreathed in a golden mantle of psychic light that cut through the ashen gloom. His presence was overwhelming, a storm contained within flesh. His eyes, like twin stars, burned with an intensity that cowed even the mightiest of his warriors. His voice, when it came, was both a whisper and a command, resonating across the gathering legions. "They will come for us in great numbers," he said, his tone calm, measured. "But numbers are no shield against inevitability. The age of Ursh ends here." Beside the Emperor stood Ushotan, a towering figure clad in dented and battle-worn bronze armor, streaked with the dried blood of countless campaigns. Ushotan was no mortal general, but one of the highest-ranking Thunder Warriors, a battlefield leader who had earned his place through ferocity and triumph. His presence was formidable even among his transhuman kin, his every movement radiating the sheer physical dominance of a being designed for war. His helm, marked with a black, jagged crest, loomed above even the Emperor's otherworldly custodian guard, though his fierce gaze betrayed an unsettling intensity, equal parts ambition and fury. "The scouts report movement, my lord," Ushotan said, pointing toward the horizon where the faint shimmer of Ursh's banners could be seen, barely visible through the haze of smoke and ash. "Kalagann sends his vanguard. They'll test our lines before committing their full force." The Emperor regarded him for a moment, his expression calm but inscrutable. Though he valued Ushotan's strength and battlefield acumen, the Thunder Warrior's temperament was always a concern. Like many of his kind, Ushotan was both an unstoppable force and a flawed creation, unpredictable, volatile, and far too dangerous to have a place in the Emperor's long-term plans. For now, however, such tools were necessary. "Let them come," the Emperor said simply, his tone measured and unwavering. "They will find only death." Below the rise, the rest of the army prepared for battle. The mortal auxiliaries, conscripts pulled from conquered states, formed a trembling line, their scavenged weapons and makeshift armor pitiful beside the hulking forms of the Thunder Warriors. Behind them stood ancient war engines, colossal constructs of steel and forgotten technology, their origins stretching back to the shattered remnants of the Dark Age of technology. Their sheer size and destructive power gave them an air of dominance, and the grinding of their treads across the battlefield was a promise of annihilation. The Thunder Warriors, for their part, moved with a grim focus. Among their number, there were murmurs, low, distorted voices echoing from helm to helm, but no hesitation. For all their flaws, for all the stories of berserk rages and bloodlust, the Thunder Warriors were unmatched in their terrible purpose. When the moment came, they would break Ursh as they had broken every other empire. As the sun dipped lower, the horizon became a shifting, roiling mass of movement. Ursh's vanguard emerged from the haze like a tide of blackened steel and flesh. The banners of a million standards whipped in the wind, adorned with jagged runes and sigils of long-forgotten meaning. The soldiers of Ursh marched in perfect unison, their discipline born not of training but of fear. Fear of the man who ruled them, fear of the sorcery that bound their wills to his own. Among them strode the Psykers, their forms twisted and warped by the powers they wielded. They chanted as they walked, their voices a discordant cacophony that seemed to make the very air writhe. Ushotan's gauntleted hand gripped the hilt of his massive blade, a weapon etched with crude but deadly efficiency. "It begins," he said. The Emperor raised a hand, and silence fell over his forces. The Thunder Warriors shifted, their heavy boots grinding against the stone, their weapons raised and ready. The air was thick with anticipation, the kind of silence that only existed in the moments before slaughter. And then the Emperor spoke a single word. "Advance." The vanguard of Ursh surged forward, a black tide of steel and flesh that consumed the landscape. Their banners whipped and cracked in the atomic winds, emblazoned with jagged runes that seemed to pulse with unnatural energy. The soldiers moved as one, a mindless machine driven by terror and domination. Each soldier bore the marks of a Techno-Barbarian's life, Scarred faces, augmented limbs, and ancient weapons, crude but devastatingly effective. Behind them, their psychers raised their hands, threads of sickly green and black light twisting from their fingers into the sky, their incantations fueling the terrible momentum of the charge. But as the forces of Ursh neared the Emperor's line, the psychers faltered. Their chanting stuttered, then cracked, as if some invisible force had stifled the breath in their lungs. The air itself seemed to push back against them, thickening with an oppressive, invisible weight. Where their sorcery had once flowed freely, it now withered and dissipated. One psyker, a gaunt figure with hollow eyes, collapsed, his strength and connection to the warp severed. It was then that the warriors of Ursh saw him. The Emperor stepped forward. Bathed in a light that burned away the pall of the battlefield, he descended the rise where he had stood. Every step carried with it the presence of inevitability, as though the world itself bent around him. In his hand, he carried a sword, no mere weapon, but a blade wreathed in psychic fire. Its flames licked the air with unnatural life, radiating a fierce golden light. This was no ordinary steel. It was an extension of his will, a manifestation of his mastery over the warp. Even the Thunder Warriors paused for a fraction of a second as their creator moved to the front. They knew he would lead. A wave of psychic might rolled out from the Emperor, unseen but deeply felt. The psychers of Ursh staggered, clutching their heads as the weight of his power bore down upon them. The soldiers behind them hesitated, their once cohesive charge faltering as fear spread through their ranks like a contagion. Their commanders shouted for them to press on, but the spell of terror had already begun to take hold. Now, the Emperor said, his voice as calm as a whisper but carrying the weight of thunder. The Thunder Warriors charged. They moved like an avalanche, bronze-clad titans descending the battlefield with unrelenting fury. Their massive strides devoured the distance between the two armies in moments, their strength crushing all in their path. The warriors of Ursh braced for the impact, but their courage, born of fear and tyranny, cracked like glass beneath the weight of the Thunder Warriors' onslaught. The clash was catastrophic. The first rank of Ursh's vanguard broke apart as the Thunder Warriors smashed into them, their weapons cleaving through lines of soldiers. Shields splintered, and formations collapsed under the sheer force of the assault. Ushotan himself was at the forefront, his blade cutting a brutal path through the chaos. Each swing of his weapon tore through the enemy's defenses, driving deeper into the heart of their formation. The Custodian Guard followed in the wake of the Thunder Warriors, their golden armor gleaming like distant stars in the haze of battle. Where the Thunder Warriors were a storm, raw and unchecked, the Custodians were precision incarnate. They moved with the grace of artisans, each strike perfectly measured, their guardian spears finding their marks with lethal efficiency. To witness them fight was to see mastery honed to perfection. But the battle was far from over. From the rear of the Ursh formation came a great roar, and with it, their war machines appeared. Hulking constructs of rusted iron and scavenged technologies bellowing black smoke and unleashing devastation. Cannons roared, shredding the air with projectiles that detonated in blinding flashes of light and fire. The advance of the Emperor's forces slowed as the war engines unleashed their payloads, sending arcs of plasma and explosives into the charging Thunder Warriors. Still, they did not stop. The Thunder Warriors pressed forward, their armor scorched and battered, their movements fueled by unrelenting momentum. And at their head, the Emperor stood unflinching, the psychic flames of his sword undimmed by the fire and destruction. His voice echoed across the battlefield, carrying a single, resolute command. Destroy them. The war engines of Ursh rumbled forward, belching fire and smoke as they unleashed their arsenal upon the advancing Thunder Warriors. Massive rotary cannons spat streams of jagged, rusted rounds, cutting swaths through the battlefield. Plasma projectors flared in violent bursts, leaving scorched craters where moments earlier there had been bronze-clad giants or hapless auxiliaries. The battlefield became a maelstrom of destruction, a deafening symphony of explosions and grinding metal. Yet still, the Emperor's forces pressed on. The Thunder Warriors waded through the firestorm, their resilience and brute strength making them unstoppable. Though their armor was scorched and their flesh torn, they were relentless. One, his helm shattered and an eye lost, tore through the treads of a war engine with his bare hands, the machine collapsing in a heap of shrieking metal. Another drove his blade through the iron hull of a tank, pulling the pilot from its interior and silencing the machine in an eruption of sparks and twisted steel. At the Emperor's side, Ushotan moved like a living tempest. His blade carved through the soldiers who swarmed to meet him, their weapons shattering against his overwhelming strength. "Cowards!" he snarled, his voice carrying across the chaos. Bloodstained and furious, he surged toward a towering war engine, its rusted cannons swiveling to aim at the advancing custodian guard. The custodians, disciplined and precise, flanked the war engines with their lethal efficiency. Where the Thunder Warriors tore through the battlefield with unchecked ferocity, the custodians were calm and methodical. Their guardian spears struck exposed joints and machinery with flawless accuracy, each strike crippling or destroying their targets. One custodian leapt onto the hull of a war machine, driving his spear into its core. The machine exploded in a pillar of flame, and the custodian landed amidst the wreckage, already moving toward his next foe. The Emperor strode forward with measured purpose. Where the Thunder Warriors were fury and the custodians precision, he was inevitability. His sword burned like a beacon, each strike an execution of his will. With a single sweep, he cleaved through a war engine that had dared to target him, its molten remains collapsing at his feet. Soldiers and psychers alike fell before him, their courage evaporating under his presence. But Kalagann's forces were not without their own strengths. From the heart of the Urshian line came a sudden eruption of unholy energy, a sorcerous storm that tore through the battlefield. The air itself seemed to scream as the unnatural forces of the warp were unleashed, a maelstrom of blackened lightning and psychic power that coiled like serpents through the sky. The storm battered the Emperor's forces, tearing apart mortal soldiers and even staggering the indomitable Thunder Warriors. Psychers from Ursh, frail in body but blazing with warp-born energy, raised their arms as the storm intensified. Each was a conduit for Kalagann's will, their powers feeding the storm that threatened to consume the Emperor's army. Around the Psychers, shadows writhed unnaturally, forming impossible shapes. Harsh whispers filled the air, echoing from nowhere and everywhere at once. It was sorcery of the foulest kind, and it radiated malice as thick as the smoke above the battlefield. Ushotan, standing amid the bronze ranks of the Thunder Warriors, roared his defiance. Without waiting for orders, he charged, his massive form cleaving through the battlefield like a battering ram. Thunder Warriors followed in his wake, their bellows cutting through the mounting fear as they surged toward the Psychers. The Emperor, standing tall amidst the chaos, turned his gaze toward the storm. His golden form seemed to burn brighter, the psychic flames of his sword roaring to life as he raised the blade high. The lightning of the storm lashed toward him, but shattered harmlessly against his psychic aura, scattering into harmless sparks. "Ushotan," the Emperor called, his voice calm but commanding. "Strike their heart. I will end the storm." Ushotan didn't hesitate. He surged forward, leading the Thunder Warriors with a roar that rose above the chaos of the battlefield. His massive blade, forged with brutal simplicity, rose and fell in punishing arcs, scattering Urshian soldiers like brittle kindling. Behind him, the Thunder Warriors charged as one, their bronze-clad forms crashing into the enemy lines with devastating force. Where they passed, the enemy ranks crumbled, shields splintered, formations collapsed, and the resistance of Kalagann's soldiers melted away under the onslaught. Ahead, the Psychers of Ursh chanted faster, their voices rising to a frantic pitch as the Thunder Warriors closed the distance. The storm above them writhed in response, bolts of unnatural energy lashing out at the advancing line. Some Thunder Warriors fell, their armor blackened by the crackling energy, but their brothers pressed on without hesitation. They were relentless, driven by the singular purpose for which they had been made. Ushotan reached the Psychers first. They stood in a circle of shimmering green light, their gaunt forms hunched and trembling as they poured their energies into the storm. The air around them shimmered with warp-tainted energy, unnatural shapes flickering at the edge of perception. One of the Psychers turned, his face twisted with fury, and unleashed a surge of psychic fire toward Ushotan. The flames struck him full in the chest, but the massive warrior advanced through the inferno, his armor scorched but unyielding. With a fierce swing, his blade struck the psyker down, the sorcerer's death unraveling the tendrils of energy that had tethered the storm. The other psykers faltered, their chanting breaking into cries of panic as Ushotan and the Thunder Warriors tore into their circle. The storm overhead began to weaken, its flickering tendrils dissipating as one by one, the sorcerers fell. Ushotan's strikes were swift and merciless, each blow silencing another source of warp-born power. Around him, his warriors overran the remaining defenders, their momentum carrying them deeper into the heart of the enemy formation. At the center of the battlefield, the Emperor raised his blazing sword toward the heavens. With a single, deliberate motion, he swept it downward, and the remnants of the storm shattered. The blackened skies split open, the unnatural clouds dissolving into nothingness as sunlight pierced through for the first time in hours. The oppressive weight that had hung over the battlefield lifted, and for a brief moment, the carnage gave way to silence. But the battle was not yet won. Even as the psykers fell and the storm dissipated, Kalagann's forces regrouped, their war engines forming an iron wall as soldiers reassembled behind them. From the distance, horns blared, a deep, resonant sound that echoed across the field. It was a rallying cry. The ground trembled as reinforcements emerged over the horizon, ranks of fresh Urshian troops marching into view. Their numbers were vast, their banners rippling in the smoke-choked air like a tide of shadow. Ushotan turned back toward the Emperor, his chest heaving from exertion, his blade glinting in the broken sunlight. "They do not relent," he growled, his voice steady but brimming with anticipation. "What is your command, my lord?" The Emperor strode toward him, his expression calm but unyielding. The psychic fire of his sword burned brighter, casting an ethereal light that seemed to push back the encroaching darkness. He surveyed the battlefield, his golden armor shining amidst the ash and ruin, and spoke with the quiet certainty of one who shaped destiny itself. "They fight because they still believe their master protects them," the Emperor said. "We will show them the truth." He raised his sword, its flames flaring to life as he pointed toward the distant heart of the enemy army. "Kalagann awaits. We will bring this to an end." The battlefield was a wasteland of shattered terrain and drifting smoke. Kalagann's reinforcements marched forward, their banners rippling like dark waves across the horizon. Leading them were his elite troops, towering figures encased in crude, patchworked armor, their weapons humming with unstable energy. Their march was steady, and their numbers seemed endless, a grim reminder of the resources Kalagann had brought to bear. At the Emperor's front lines, Ushotan stood ready, his massive blade resting on his shoulder. The Thunder Warriors around him, their bronze armor bearing the scars of countless engagements, waited silently. For them, battle was not an ordeal but a purpose. "They send their champions now," Ushotan remarked, his voice calm, almost eager. "Let them see what true strength is." The Emperor stepped forward, his golden form radiant even in the ash-laden air. Beside him, a custodian guard captain surveyed the advancing enemy, his voice steady and assured. "Kalagann sends his best to stop us, my lord. They will fail." "They will," the Emperor said, raising his blazing sword. Its golden light flared, cutting through the shadows as he gestured toward the enemy. "Advance. Show them the price of resistance." The Thunder Warriors charged, their cries echoing across the battlefield as they crashed into the enemy ranks. Behind them, the custodian guard advanced with calm precision, their guardian spears raised and ready. Mortal auxiliaries followed, their resolve strengthened by the sight of the Emperor walking at the forefront, his presence a beacon in the chaos. The clash was immediate and fierce. Kalagann's elite troops, armed with stolen technology and foul enchantments, fought with brutal efficiency. Energy weapons crackled as they fired into the oncoming warriors, and the ground shook under the weight of the conflict. Several Thunder Warriors fell under the opening volleys, their massive forms crashing to the ground, but their brothers pressed on without hesitation, their charge unbroken. Ushotan met one of the enemy champions in single combat. The towering foe, encased in jagged black armor etched with glowing runes, swung a massive weapon toward him. Sparks flew as the blades collided, the force of the impact rippling through the air. "You think brute strength will save you?" the champion sneered, his voice distorted by the vox grill of his helm. Ushotan answered with a low growl, his grip tightening on his blade. "No, but it will end you. With a surge of force, Urshian drove his weapon forward, breaking through the champion's guard and striking his armor with a resounding blow. The duel raged on, each strike echoing through the battlefield until Urshian found his opening. A decisive swing shattered the champion's defenses, and the enemy fell, his weapon broken and his form collapsing to the ground. Elsewhere, the Custodian Guard advanced with disciplined precision. Their golden armor gleamed against the dim battlefield as they moved with unerring purpose. Where the Thunder Warriors relied on overwhelming force, the Custodians were deliberate, each strike perfectly placed to disable and destroy. One Custodian confronted a pair of enemy champions, their augmented weapons glowing with unstable power. He sidestepped their attacks with practiced grace, his spear finding its mark and ending the fight swiftly. At the heart of the battlefield, the Emperor moved forward, his sword blazing with psychic fire. The light of his blade cut through the enemy ranks, scattering soldiers and forcing even the hardened champions of Ursh to falter. None who stood before him could hold their ground for long. With every step, he pushed deeper into the enemy lines, his golden form unyielding amidst the chaos. In the distance, fresh shapes emerged. Colossal constructs of iron and sorcery, their forms towering over the battlefield. Their weapons glowed with a baleful light, and their arrival sent tremors through the ground. These war machines, greater and more fearsome than those that had come before, loomed over the horizon, symbols of Kalagann's desperation. Urshian regrouped with the Thunder Warriors, his armor dented and blade raised. The colossal war machines of Ursh loomed larger as they approached, their towering forms casting long shadows over the battlefield. Each was a grotesque fusion of ancient technology and foul sorcery, their frames bristling with weapons that hummed with unstable energy. Cannons spat beams of searing light, carving trenches into the earth, while spiked limbs crushed anything in their path. These were not mere constructs. They moved with an unnatural awareness, as if guided by something malevolent. At the heart of the formation, surrounded by these monstrosities, sat Kalagann himself. The Lord of Ursh commanded from a towering command platform of blackened steel, his throne encased in shifting shadows that writhed like living things. The armor of pearl adorned his hulking frame, gleaming faintly even beneath the smoke-filled sky. In his hand, he held a staff crowned with an unearthly crystal that pulsed with green light. Around him stood his generals, Lurtuos, Shenkal, and Kalagann, each clad in armor warped by sorcery, their presence unsettling the very air around them. Kalagann's voice boomed across the battlefield. "Do you see now, Emperor?" he roared, his tone thick with mockery. "You are not a god, you are a man. You will drown beneath the tide of my dominion." The Emperor stood amidst the chaos, his blazing sword casting steady light in the gloom. His golden armor was streaked with ash and blood, yet his expression was unreadable, unshaken. Around him, the Thunder Warriors regrouped, their bronze forms battered but unyielding, while the Custodian Guard formed a disciplined cordon, their spears gleaming as they awaited his command. Urshian approached, his armor dented and blade resting on his shoulder. "Kalagann hides behind machines and magic," he growled. "Let me cut through them. I will drag him from his throne." The Emperor's gaze did not shift. His voice was low, calm, yet absolute. "No." Urshian scowled, his hand tightening on his blade. "Why not? He is nothing without his sorcery." The Emperor turned toward him, his words measured, precise. "He is not a man. He is a conduit, and what flows through him will not let go easily." Urshian exhaled sharply but stepped back. He turned to the Thunder Warriors and raised his blade. "Form up. We take the line." The Emperor raised his sword high, its psychic flames flaring brighter. He pointed toward the heart of the enemy formation. "The machines, break them." At his command, the Thunder Warriors charged. They struck the enemy like a bronze tide, crashing into Kalagann's forces with raw, unrelenting fury. Their massive weapons struck against the towering war machines, sparks flying as steel met iron. The constructs retaliated, beams of light and jagged limbs striking out. Yet for every Thunder Warrior who fell, another drove forward, hacking and tearing at the machines with grim resolve. The Custodian Guard moved behind them, their advance precise and disciplined. While the Thunder Warriors attacked with brute force, the Custodians targeted weak points with flawless accuracy. One Custodian leapt onto a war machine, his spear piercing a vital joint, and the construct collapsed under its own weight. Around him, others dismantled the enemy with the same methodical precision, their golden armor glinting amid the wreckage. Above the fray, Kalagann watched, his expression twisted with satisfaction. "Is this all you have, Emperor?" he called, his voice carrying across the battlefield. "Your tools are crude, your warriors are flawed, you are already defeated." The Emperor stepped forward, his blazing sword cleaving through a war machine that turned its weapons on him. The construct crumbled, collapsing into a heap of molten slag, and the ground trembled beneath its fall. The Emperor lowered his sword, standing amid the destruction, his voice calm, devoid of emotion. "Kalagann." The Lord of Ursh rose from his throne, shadows coiling around him as the crystal atop his staff pulsed with warp energy. The air thickened as the power of the Immaterium seeped into the battlefield. His generals stepped forward, their weapons glowing with sorcery, their forms twisting and warping in unnatural ways. "This is only the beginning," Kalagann said, his tone dripping with malice. He spread his arms as if inviting the Emperor forward. "Come, Emperor, come and see the gods you cannot defy." The Emperor said nothing. His blazing sword flared once more, and he strode toward the rising storm. The battlefield trembled as Kalagann's generals descended from the blackened platform, their hulking forms radiating power that warped the air around them. Lurtois, clad in jagged, crimson-etched armor, advanced with terrifying speed, his serrated claws carving the air. Shenkal followed, wielding a double-headed glaive that crackled with green energy, each sweep leaving faint distortions in its wake. Behind them strode Kalagann, a grotesque figure fused with machinery, his clawed hands glowing with volatile warp fire that made the air twist unnaturally. The three generals fanned out, each marching toward a different section of the battlefield as Kalagann watched from above. "My generals will do what your tools cannot, Emperor," Kalagann called, his voice sharp and mocking. "They are death-given form." The Emperor did not answer. His sword flared brighter as he raised it, signaling the advance. The Custodian Guard moved first, splitting into smaller units and converging on the generals. Each step was deliberate, their spears raised and ready, their movements in perfect synchronization. Thunder Warriors roared as they surged forward, Ushotan leading the charge toward the lumbering war machines that continued to stalk across the battlefield. The Emperor's forces pressed inward like a blade, cutting into the heart of Kalagann's defenses. Lurtois met his challengers with terrifying speed, his armored bulk moving far faster than seemed possible. His claws tore through the earth and sent warriors sprawling with each strike. A custodian lunged at him, the blade of his spear aimed at the glowing sigils carved into the general's chest. Lurtois twisted aside, his clawed gauntlet slamming into the warrior's armor and sending him flying. Another custodian attacked from the flank, but Lurtois spun, catching the spear mid-thrust and snapping it in two before raking his claws across the warrior's helm. The remaining custodians adjusted their formation, circling him with practiced efficiency. Their strikes came in unison, their spears flashing in the dim light as they targeted the weak points in Lurtois' armor. One spear found its mark, driving into the sigils on his chest. Lurtois bellowed as cracks spread across his armor, the glowing runes fading. The custodians pressed their attack, their coordinated precision overwhelming even his monstrous speed and strength. On the opposite flank, Shenkal waded into the ranks of the Thunder Warriors, his glaive carving arcs of green energy that disintegrated anything it touched. Each sweep of the weapon left broken bodies and scorched earth in its wake. Ushotan roared as he charged toward the general, his massive blade raised high. Shenkal turned to face him, his expression unreadable beneath his twisted helm. "Come then," he said, his voice a low, unnatural growl. "Show me what strength is." The two giants clashed, Ushotan's massive blade meeting the crackling glaive in an explosion of sparks and energy. The ground split beneath their feet as they traded blow after blow, neither yielding. Shenkal's weapon was faster, its green fire burning through the air with every swing, but Ushotan's relentless strength forced him to step back with each strike. "You are nothing but brute force," Shenkal sneered, his glaive catching Ushotan's blade and throwing it aside. "And force alone is not enough." Ushotan snarled and slammed his shoulder into the general, driving him off balance. With a roar, he swung his blade in a wide arc, its edge finding Shenkal's arm. The glaive tumbled from the general's grasp as his arm twisted unnaturally, green light spilling from the wound like molten fire. Shenkal roared, his confidence faltering as Ushotan pressed the attack, his blade forcing him back step by step. Near the center of the battlefield, Qualodon strode toward the Emperor, his clawed hands trailing tendrils of warp energy that lashed out at anything near. Mortal soldiers caught in his path screamed as the energy consumed them, their forms collapsing into ash. Even the Thunder Warriors hesitated, their usual ferocity tempered by the oppressive aura radiating from the general. The Emperor stepped forward alone, his blazing sword held low at his side. Qualodon paused, tilting his head as though studying him. "You cannot stop what is coming," the general hissed, his voice echoing with strange, otherworldly tones. "The gods have willed it. You are but a fleeting spark before the inferno." The Emperor said nothing. He advanced with measured steps, his presence calm and implacable. Qualodon snarled and unleashed a torrent of warp fire, the searing energy tearing through the air toward him. The Emperor raised his sword and cut through the flames with a single motion, the psychic fire of his blade parting the attack as though it were smoke. Qualodon recoiled, his confidence visibly shaken. He gathered more energy, the warp around him boiling with raw power, but the Emperor did not stop. With each step, his golden light burned brighter, his sword humming with unleashed fury. Qualodon lashed out again and again, but the Emperor was relentless. When he reached the general, he struck once. The psychic fire of his blade consumed Qualodon utterly, leaving nothing but silence and ash. As Qualodon fell, Kalagann stood above it all, his throne surrounded by coiling shadows. His smile faltered for the first time. The battlefield was silent now, save for the distant groans of collapsing war machines and the retreating cries of broken soldiers. At the heart of it all, the Emperor stood, his blazing sword casting long shadows on the blackened steps leading to Kalagann's platform. Above him, the Lord of Ursh loomed like a monument to arrogance, his throne framed by coiling shadows and the pulsing green light of his staff. The armor of pearl clung tightly to Kalagann's massive frame, its pristine surface gleaming faintly despite the corruption flowing through its wearer. A relic of the dark age of technology, the Emperor mused, and perhaps worth preserving. "Do you see them, Emperor?" Kalagann roared, raising his staff as tendrils of energy coiled through the air around him. "The power eternal, the force that reshapes worlds and bends men to its will. It has made me its prophet, and through me its dominion will reign unbroken." His voice was a jagged crescendo of triumph and madness, amplified by the warp-tainted power coursing through him. The Emperor began to ascend the steps, his golden armor streaked with ash but gleaming with an inner light. His sword hung low at his side, its psychic fire subdued but ready. Kalagann's ranting echoed around him, but the Emperor's thoughts were elsewhere. He could have destroyed this man in an instant. Kalagann's power was not his own, merely borrowed corruption from the warp, and the Emperor was its master. A flicker of his will would have been enough to extinguish it. But this moment was not about simplicity. It was about what would follow. Kalagann's empire thrived on fanaticism, and its people worshipped him as a god incarnate. To destroy him here, in full view of the crumbling remnants of his forces, would shatter that illusion. The collapse of Kalagann's myth would ripple through Ursh, spreading doubt, fear, and submission in its wake, a tool the Emperor could wield. And the armor. The armor of pearl was remarkable, a prize worth studying. It had endured unblemished by time and even by the corruption of the man inside it. To destroy it here would be a waste, and the Emperor rarely wasted anything of value. Kalagann's laughter cut through his musings. "You are silent, Emperor. Is it fear? Is it doubt? Does your truth waver before what cannot be denied?" He raised his staff high, the coiling energy around him snapping outward in waves. The air cracked and trembled as tendrils of the warp lashed out, splitting the stone beneath the Emperor's feet. The Emperor reached the top of the steps and stopped. He studied Kalagann for a moment, his expression unreadable. The shadows coiled tighter, the air thick with the stink of corruption, but the Emperor did not falter. "You are a puppet," the Emperor said at last, his voice calm and cutting, "and now your strings are cut." Kalagann bellowed in fury, raising his staff to unleash a torrent of energy, A wave of green and black power surged toward the Emperor, its force bending the air and shrieking as it tore through reality itself. The Emperor moved with effortless precision, raising his free hand. The warp-born energy stopped midair, writhing like a trapped animal, and with a flick of his will, it collapsed into nothing. Golden light erupted from the Emperor, rolling outward in a wave of psychic power. The shadows around Kalagann dissolved instantly, the coiling tendrils of energy unraveling like threads. The staff in Kalagann's hands splintered, the crystal at its tip shattering in a burst of sparks. Kalagann staggered, his towering presence crumbling under the weight of the Emperor's unrelenting will. Kalagann's defiance turned to terror. He stumbled back, his body writhing within the armor as the corruption sustaining him turned inward. The taint that had empowered him now consumed him, burning him from within. His screams rose above the battlefield, desperate and inhuman, as the Emperor's psychic fire seared away all that remained of his strength. The armor of pearl, untouched by the fire, gleamed faintly as Kalagann's body withered to dust within it. When his screams ceased, silence fell. Below, the battlefield stilled. The war machines ground to a halt, their controllers broken. Kalagann's remaining forces, their supposed prophet destroyed, scattered in disarray. The sky, once choked with ash and the taint of the warp, began to clear as sunlight broke through. The Emperor lowered his sword, its flames dimming. He stepped forward and placed a hand on the armor of pearl, its smooth surface cool beneath his gauntlet. For a moment, he studied it, then turned away as Urshian approached. The Thunder Warrior's battered form bore the marks of relentless combat, his blade streaked with blood and ash. He glanced from the lifeless armor to the Emperor. The battlefield remained quiet, the echoes of war fading into the distance as Ursh's armies fled in scattered disarray. The sunlight breaking through the soot-choked sky cast the ruins in a harsh, pale light, illuminating the wreckage of war machines and the broken banners of Kalagann's empire. The Emperor stood at the foot of the blackened platform, his golden form still and commanding amidst the devastation. He turned his gaze toward Urshian, who waited nearby, his armor battered and streaked with grime, but his posture steady, unshaken, even after the ferocity of the battle. Without looking at the lifeless remains of Kalagann, the Emperor gestured toward the armor of pearl, which still gleamed atop the platform. "Have the armor collected," the Emperor said, his voice calm but absolute. "It is to be sent to Malkador immediately. He will know what to do with it." Urshian inclined his head slightly, his heavy blade resting on one bloodied pauldron. "And the men?" he asked, glancing across the battlefield at the survivors. The Thunder Warriors who remained standing, their bronze forms bent under the weight of their own violence, and the mortal soldiers who clustered in loose, ragged groups, clutching their weapons like talismans against the horrors they had witnessed. The Emperor regarded them for a moment, his gaze sweeping over the remnants of his army. "The Thunder Warriors and the auxiliaries are to prepare camps. Let them rest and recover what strength they can tonight. At first light, we begin sweeping the hive cities for holdouts, corrupted relics, and anything that rebellion might use to survive." Urshian nodded, already moving toward the Thunder Warriors. He barked orders with a commanding voice that carried across the battlefield, directing soldiers to form work parties and begin clearing wreckage. Mortal soldiers, pale and shaken, fell into line as the battered giants of the Thunder Legion strode among them, their presence as terrifying to their allies as to their foes. Above it all, the Emperor remained motionless for a time, his gaze lingering on the distant horizon where Ursh's fleeing armies vanished into the haze. It was not triumph that filled his expression, nor satisfaction. There was only purpose, the unyielding drive that pushed him forward. One tyrant had fallen, but the world was still fractured, its people clinging to old hatreds, old lies, old chains. His work had only begun. The morning brought no respite to the battered lands of Ursh. The skies remained clouded with ash, the air carrying the acrid tang of scorched metal and blood. Yet the battlefield was no longer a place of chaos. It had become one of methodical purpose. The Emperor's forces moved with cold precision, sweeping through the ruins of hive cities that sprawled like ancient carcasses across the blackened terrain. The Thunder Warriors, their massive forms imposing even in the dim light, cleared streets and subjugated whatever remained of Ursh's resistance. Mortals followed behind, cataloging relics, disarming traps, and rooting out the few fanatics still clinging to Kalagann's shattered legacy. The Emperor walked among them, his golden armor glinting faintly in the smog-filled dawn. He said little, but his presence drove the work forward with an almost unnatural efficiency. The mortals averted their eyes as he passed, not out of fear, but reverence. The Thunder Warriors, despite their crude demeanor, offered him respectful salutes when he drew near. Even Urshian, towering and bloodied from the previous day's battle, stood a little straighter when the Emperor approached. The ruins of the Hive cities were a labyrinth of collapsed towers, ash-clogged streets, and shadowy depths where survivors might still linger. The Emperor's army pushed methodically through these ruins, rooting out enemies and sweeping for hidden dangers. The Thunder Warriors led the charge, their bronze forms moving with brutal efficiency as they destroyed barricades and cut down the last futile pockets of resistance. Behind them, mortal auxiliaries advanced carefully, dragging scavenged relics and materials from the wreckage. But as they pressed deeper into the heart of the Hive, the Emperor began to feel it. At first, it was faint, an ebbing and flowing presence beneath the surface of the earth, almost imperceptible against the noise of the ruined city. But with every step, the sensation grew stronger. It was ancient, rhythmic, like a pulse, its flow resonating in ways no mortal could comprehend. By the time they reached the shattered remnants of a central plaza, the presence had become unmistakable. The Emperor halted abruptly, his blazing eyes scanning the ruined expanse around him. The plaza had once been a hub of activity, but now it was a cratered wasteland, ringed by collapsed buildings and twisted machinery. Yet beneath the layers of stone and rubble, he could feel it, something vast and powerful, waiting patiently beneath the earth. Urshian, the Emperor said suddenly, his voice cutting through the noise of the operation. The Thunder Warrior turned to him. "My lord?" "There is something here," the Emperor said. He gestured to the ground beneath them, his tone calm but commanding. "Something ancient. I will need earth-moving equipment. Have it brought here immediately." Urshian hesitated for only a moment before bowing his head. "As you command." He strode off, issuing orders to the mortal workers, who immediately began relaying the Emperor's request through the chain of command. The machinery was far from the Hive cities, scattered across supply depots and outposts that had yet to catch up with the campaign. It would take time. While they waited, the mortals set to work with hand tools and sheer determination. Armed only with shovels, pickaxes, and buckets scavenged from the ruins, they dug into the hard-packed earth and rubble. The crater deepened hour by hour under the relentless efforts of men and women eager to please the great unifier. Their exhaustion was clear, but none faltered under the Emperor's watchful presence. By late in the night, the crater had reached nearly 35 feet, its edges ringed by piles of dirt and debris. The workers' hands were raw and bleeding, but their expressions were resolute. The Thunder Warriors, meanwhile, continued their sweeps through the Hive's ruins, clearing resistance and guarding against ambushes or treachery. Their heavy steps echoed through the hollowed streets, their bronze forms silhouetted against the fires of work camps as they secured the area for the growing Imperium. The Emperor stood at the edge of the excavation, his gaze fixed on the labor below. Urshian approached, his armor dimly reflecting the orange glow of torches. "The digging continues," he said. "The machines will arrive soon." "They have done well," the Emperor said, his voice quiet but firm. "But their tools will not reach what lies below. Let the equipment finish what their hands have begun." Late in the night, the earth movers finally arrived. Massive and hulking, their treads churned through the debris as they were brought into place. The workers cheered faintly, their exhaustion giving way to a flicker of hope as the machines rumbled to life. The mortals resumed their efforts, this time under the watchful eyes of overseers, ensuring efficiency as the ancient ground was torn open with powerful mechanical force. By the first light of dawn, the work had uncovered something extraordinary. A faint gleam of gold appeared through the dust and dirt, shining faintly against the rubble. As the workers cleared away the last layers of debris, a structure began to take shape beneath the crater. It was a pyramid, its edges sharp and precise, rising nearly 2 stories high. Its surface was covered in intricate patterns of gold and ancient script that seemed to shimmer faintly in the morning light. At its apex, a throne sat, carved from the same golden material, its lines impossibly smooth and perfect. Faint sounds emanated from the structure, mechanical hums, barely audible clicks, and the rhythmic vibrations of something alive with purpose. Despite its apparent age, the pyramid showed no signs of decay or wear. It was pristine, untouched by the chaos that had consumed the world above. Even the dirt that clung to its surface seemed to slide away, as though rejected by the artifact itself. The Emperor stepped forward, his golden armor catching the first rays of sunlight as he approached the pyramid. He raised a hand, and the workers retreated, their murmurs silenced as he ascended the edge of the crater. The hums grew louder as he neared, a steady, almost musical tone that resonated through the air. There was a power here, one unlike anything he had encountered before, neither purely human nor purely mechanical. It was something greater, something that had endured the rise and fall of civilizations without faltering. "Clear the rest of it," the Emperor said, his voice cutting through the silence. "I will examine it further when it is fully unearthed." The workers obeyed, their movements quick and deliberate as they resumed their excavation. Urshian stood nearby, his gaze flicking uneasily between the Emperor and the strange structure. "What is it?" Urshian asked, his voice low. The Emperor did not answer immediately. He stood before the golden pyramid, his hand brushing lightly against its surface. For a moment, he seemed almost distant, as though listening to something only he could hear. Then, without looking at Urshian, he spoke. "An artifact," the Emperor said. The cavernous hangar in the heart of the Himalaya Mountains stretched wide and deep, its walls reinforced with gleaming adamantium and layers of ancient stonework. The golden pyramid now stood in its center, its polished surface radiating a faint warmth under the overhead lights. The hum of its mechanisms persisted, faint but rhythmic, filling the vast chamber with an almost soothing vibration. The Emperor and Malcador stood before it, their forms dwarfed by the towering pyramid. The throne at its apex gleamed in the sterile light, its impossibly smooth lines and precise construction defying even the closest scrutiny. The slight mechanical sounds emanating from beneath its surface seemed to pulse faintly in time with something unseen, a rhythm that neither of them fully understood. Malcador, clad in his simple but elegant robes, broke the silence. His piercing gaze drifted from the pyramid to the Emperor, a glimmer of humor flickering in his ancient eyes. "Well," he said, his tone light but carrying the weight of their long friendship, "you do need a throne. Try it. You are immortal. What's the worst that could happen?" The Emperor, standing tall in his golden armor, allowed the faintest trace of a grin to touch his lips. His expression was still stoic, but Malcador knew him well enough to see the faint glint of amusement in his blazing eyes. "Death isn't the worst fate I could imagine," the Emperor replied, his voice calm and measured. He gazed up at the throne, his expression contemplative. "But you may be right. It does seem an obvious part of its purpose." Malcador arched a brow, tilting his head as he considered the towering structure. "Do you truly think it's a throne? Perhaps it's something else, a symbol of authority, or..." He tapped a finger against his chin. "Possibly a communication device?" The Emperor nodded slowly, his golden armor catching the light as he stepped closer to the pyramid's base. "Maybe," he said, his tone thoughtful. "But it does not seem to be of human origin, which raises even more questions." Malcador frowned slightly, his gaze narrowing. "Not of human origin? You're certain?" The Emperor placed a gauntleted hand on the smooth surface of the pyramid, his touch light, but deliberate. The hum beneath his hand seemed to respond, the rhythm shifting subtly before settling back into its steady pulse. He did not answer immediately. Instead, he stood there for a moment, his blazing eyes fixed on the throne above. "I am certain," the Emperor said finally. "Its construction is beyond anything humanity has built. Even during the dark age of technology, this precision would have been unprecedented. There is an intelligence to it, a logic that feels foreign. And yet, its purpose aligns with the needs of the moment. To amplify power," Malcador said, his tone contemplative. "Your power." "Perhaps," the Emperor replied. "If it is an amplifier, it could be a tool to reach beyond what we can currently achieve, or perhaps to maintain something beyond the limits of the flesh, a machine that sustains, a machine that bridges." Malcador chuckled softly, though there was a note of unease beneath his amusement. and yet you speak as if you've already decided to use it." The Emperor turned to his old friend, his expression calm but resolute. "I have not decided," he said. "Not yet, but I can feel it calling, Malkador. Its purpose is not passive. It was built to be used. To sit upon it is not merely to rest, it is to activate it." A week of study had revealed little about the Golden Pyramid. Its surface resisted every attempt to understand its composition, the intricate gold patterns and alien script yielding no secrets. Malkador had spent hours examining the artifact alongside the Emperor, yet even his sharp mind could discern only vague guesses. The Emperor had spent much of that time in silent contemplation, his blazing eyes fixed on the throne, as though waiting for it to reveal its purpose. Yet, deep within, he already suspected what it was meant to do. "It is no ordinary relic," the Emperor said at last, his voice cutting through the quiet hum of the chamber. He stood at the base of the pyramid, his hand resting on its smooth surface. "This pulse. It is not just a machine, Malkador. It resonates with the immaterium." Malkador stood nearby, his robes brushing the stone floor. "If it interacts with the warp, my lord, then it must be approached with caution. Its creators, whoever they were, may not have intended it as a gift." The Emperor inclined his head slightly. "Perhaps not, but it is no crude device of sorcery. This is precision, purpose. It is not tainted, it is something else entirely." Malkador frowned, but did not press further. He knew better than to doubt the Emperor's instincts. Instead, he gestured toward the throne atop the pyramid. "And what of its seat? You have said it is meant to be activated, but how?" "By sitting upon it," the Emperor said plainly, ascending the first steps of the pyramid. His golden armor caught the chamber's light, his every step calm and deliberate. "It is designed to interface with something, perhaps a mind, perhaps more." Malkador crossed his arms, watching as his old friend climbed higher. "You mean to test it, then?" "Yes," the Emperor replied, his tone leaving no room for debate. "If this device holds the potential I suspect, it will be instrumental in our efforts to unify humanity. Perhaps it is even key to something greater." Reaching the apex, the Emperor paused. The golden throne loomed before him, its smooth surface gleaming, its intricate design mesmerizing in its perfection. For a moment he studied it, his mind brushing against the hum of power that emanated from it. It pulsed faintly like a heartbeat, its rhythm steady and unyielding. Without hesitation, he lowered himself onto the throne. The moment the Emperor's form settled into the seat, the chamber seemed to shift. The hum of the pyramid rose in pitch, growing louder and deeper until it filled the vast space with a resonant vibration. Malkador stumbled back slightly, steadying himself against the wall, as the air thickened with psychic energy. Golden light erupted from the throne, flooding the chamber in a brilliant radiance that burned away shadows and danced across the walls. The Emperor sat motionless, his hands resting on the throne's arms, his eyes blazing with light that rivaled the sun. The golden pyramid began to pulse, each wave of light synchronized with the Emperor's psychic aura, amplifying it, magnifying it. And then, in an instant, the Emperor's mind was no longer in the chamber. He found himself in a vast expanse of shifting light and energy, a web of impossible complexity stretching across an infinite void. The strands of the web shimmered with colors beyond human comprehension, each thread a pathway, each intersection a gateway. He understood immediately what he was seeing. This was no ordinary vision. It was the webway, a labyrinthine network of paths and portals that spanned the galaxy. The Emperor moved through the webway, not with his body, but with his will. The threads responded to his presence, their light bending and flowing around him like a river parting for a stone. He sensed their purpose, their ancient design, and the minds that had created them. They were not human minds. They were older, colder, and incomprehensible. But the Emperor's power pressed through their remnants like a knife cutting through cloth. Here, in this place, he felt something he had not known in centuries: wonder. The webway was a construct of pure mastery, a tool that could unite the stars without ever touching the dangers of the warp. With this, humanity could break free of its reliance on the immaterium. No more would ships travel blind through the tides of chaos, at the mercy of daemons and storm-racked currents. The webway offered safety, speed, and control. But the longer he lingered, the more he noticed something else. The edges of the webway flickered, their light dimming in places, like a fire struggling to hold against an encroaching darkness. At these edges, he saw the warp clawing against the structure, its chaotic tendrils seeking purchase. The webway was ancient, but it was not indestructible. The Emperor extended his will, testing the pathways. To his amazement, they responded. Where the warp pressed hardest, he focused his power, stabilizing the flickering strands. The energy of the throne amplified his psychic strength, making what would have been impossible into something attainable. He could see it now. This device was more than an amplifier. It was a gateway, a control system. With it, he could master the webway. The chamber returned in a rush. The Emperor rose from the throne, his movements deliberate. His golden armor gleamed as he descended the steps, his expression unreadable. When he spoke, his voice was calm but heavy with certainty. "It is the webway, Malkador," he said. "The device is a gateway and a tool to control it." Malkador's brows knit together. "The webway? The Eldar's labyrinth?" The Emperor nodded. "Yes, but it is fractured. It decays under the pressure of the warp. With this, we could repair it, stabilize it, perhaps even claim it." Malkador was silent for a moment, his sharp mind already calculating the implications. A system of pathways throughout the galaxy, stable, controlled, if it could be done. "It must be done," the Emperor said. "This is no longer a question of potential. This device will be the foundation for a new future, a future where humanity is free from the warp." The Emperor stood in silence at the base of the Golden Pyramid, his gaze distant. The echoes of his brief journey into the webway lingered in his mind, a lattice of light and energy, ancient and immense, teetering on the edge of ruin yet brimming with untapped potential. It was a construct meant for something far greater than the fractured galaxy of old night, and now it was his to claim, to repurpose, to wield. Malkador, ever watchful, stepped beside him. "This endeavor, my lord," he said carefully, "will require everything: resources, strength, and above all, faith from those who follow you." The Emperor inclined his head slightly, his expression unreadable. "Faith is not required, old friend. Humanity needs only direction, purpose, and unity. With this," he gestured toward the pyramid, "we will achieve what the warp seeks to deny us, an empire that does not bend to chaos." Malkador nodded, though a shadow of unease crossed his features. "And if the warp fights back, this device may stabilize the webway, but it will not silence the immaterium. The darker forces will not yield so easily." "They will not need to yield," the Emperor said, his voice like granite. "They will be driven back, contained. The webway is the key. With it, humanity will no longer cower before the warp, but surpass it entirely. No more blind jumps through the immaterium. No more daemons lurking in the shadows. No more stagnation. The stars will belong to us again." "And the risks?" Malkador asked, his tone measured. "Even the smallest misstep could bring disaster." The Emperor turned, his golden form blazing faintly under the chamber's harsh lights. "There is always risk, but without action, humanity is doomed to be consumed by the darkness. Every path forward carries peril. This path carries the promise of salvation." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The hum of the pyramid filled the silence, a quiet reminder of its immense alien power. Finally, Malkador allowed himself a rare smile. "You always did prefer the bold approach." The Emperor's lips twitched, almost imperceptibly. "It is the only approach." The two turned to face the artifact once more, the weight of its implications settling around them. The Golden Throne and its pyramid would be studied further, refined, and prepared for the great project ahead. Humanity stood at the edge of a new dawn, its fate tied to the hands of its immortal leader. The Emperor's voice broke the silence, soft but resolute. "It begins here. Terra will be unified. And then, the galaxy."